I'm really happy to welcome you all to Digital Photography's I3 lecture series. We are thrilled to have Phil Toledano here tonight as our guest speaker. Um, Phil was born in London to a French-Moroccan mother and an American father. He is currently based in New York City. As a photographer, he is equally at home in fine art and commercial arenas. His images, which engage with both intimate concerns and the ramifications of global politics, have earned him a cult following, which is an understatement. I mean, a couple million viewers for his project, Days with My Father. It's for real, the cult following. His works are widely exhibited and are regularly featured in publications such as Esquire, GQ, the independent magazine Interview, Le Monde, The New Yorker, The New York Times Magazine, The London Times, Vanity Fair and Wallpaper. Recent solo exhibitions include Paul Kopeikin Gallery and the Perth Center for Photography in 2012, Kunstverein Wiesbaden. Danke, danke. Klumpching Gallery and Gallery 339 in 2010, and House Projects and the Center for Photography at Woodstock, 2009. In 2012, his work was included in Breda Photo, the Singapore Fringe Art Festival, and Photo Frio International Festival of Photography. In 2011 at Foto Narden, and in 2010 as part of the Foto Legendo Festival and Fotografia Festival in Rome, as well as Photo Festival Poland. Phil has published 4 monographs to date: Bankrupt, Twin Palms 2005, Phone Sex, Twin Palms 2008, Days with My Father, PQ Blackwell 2010, reprinted by Chronicle Books 2012. A New Kind of Beauty, Dewey Lewis 2011. Phil, it's a great pleasure to welcome you to our lecture series.
Thank you. Can we lower the light so it's slightly less humiliating for me? That would be fantastic. Yeah. What about this one, right in my face? Come on. Oh, it is? Miserable. All right. I like it when the lights go off and then when they come back on, I'm not wearing trousers. It really livens up the audience. I'm not feeling very well. I'm kind of low energy. I've been suffering from some sort of lurgy for the last week. Have you noticed how everyone is ill in New York? Everyone I know is ill, so I feel like pressed balls. Just so you know. So I'm going to give you sort of I always say weird stuff. This is sort of a look at all the work I've done over the last 10 years. I used to be working in advertising, and then I escaped, I was explaining to Jaime, I used to get fired on a pretty regular basis when I worked in the corporate world. I'm sure that will come as a shock to you all. But eventually, 2001, I think it was 2002, I was so tired of listening to myself complain about wanting to be an artist, wanting to be a photographer, that I decided I was just going to give it a go and see what happened. So I did. And I'll show you some of the stuff that I don't actually really show people. But this is basically from about, I've been taking photographs since I was about 10 or 11. And all I took from about 10 or 11 till I was about 32 were these bizarre black and white photographs of buildings. And I think I took this when I was 22 or 23. And then in my late 20s, early 30s, I got very obsessed with air shows, so I started taking pictures at air shows. And it's all pretty straightforward, conventional photography. I never really took any color photographs. I'd never been in a studio. I had no interest in portrait photography. I found portrait photography actually wildly tedious. Having said that, when I sort of quit/got fired from my last job in 2001, I decided I was going to put together, I was going to do all these, you know when you see those wildlife films of, they bring an animal back to the African sort of grasslands and it's been in captivity and they open up the cage and it sort of creeps out and it looks around, it can't believe that it's free. That's exactly how I felt being released from corporate bondage. So I couldn't believe that once I was sort of out of the corporate structure, I was just so excited at the possibility of everything. Everything was interesting to me. And I decided that I would give myself about a year. I would work on a bunch of projects, put a portfolio together, and then stuff that was interesting only to me, and then see if anyone was interested. So one of the first, I very cannily timed my exit from a well-paid corporate job with the tech bubble implosion. So the economy was sort of in ruins, and then I thought that seemed like a perfect time to start as a photographer, as a penniless photographer. So I tend to work on a bunch of projects at the same time, but the first one I started working on was called Bankrupt. Oh, by the way, if you guys want to ask questions in the middle of my jabbering, feel free. Oh, fantastic. Thank you. Go on. Would you like to take over?
Were those first images filmed?
Yes. They were the first images were filmed, yes. Yeah, actually this first project, the first couple of projects are filmed and it all ends up being digital.
Were they 35 millimeter?
It's like the sound of music. Some of them were 35, and then some of them were medium format, I think. God, that was a long time ago. So the other thing I should actually say about myself is that I've never been the kind of photographer who takes pictures at random. I don't walk around with a camera. Everything for me, I'm joking. I'm joking. Everything for me is, everything is about an idea. Everything starts with an idea. And that's really important. Everything for me is concept. And when you'll see as you see the work progress, but initially I started off as a photographer, but as I've progressed through over the years, I've realized that photography is not the thing for me. The idea is the thing. And what's really liberating is the idea that it can be painting, it can be sculpture, it can be installation. It doesn't have to be a photograph, and that's fantastically freeing once you come to that realization, once I came to that realization. But the first stuff is all photography. So, that was a lot of words. The first project, Bankrupt, I was actually scouting for, I think it was for an editorial job in an office building. And I saw this office full of empty chairs. And it occurred to me, it really reminded me of all those photographs we see from the Second World War of mass graves. And I know it's a weird thing to think about, but when I saw this, I started thinking about the human cost of economic collapse. And I started thinking about how you show that. So I spent the next 2 years walking around in empty offices in New York, taking photographs of all the stuff that I found. I call it economic archaeology. The thing I find sort of interesting about this, the thing I find fascinating about my own work is, I've always been really interested in archaeology. Obviously, I had a lot of friends as a kid. But the thing I like about this is when you think of archaeology, you think archaeology is a permanent thing. But this is archaeology on an ephemeral level, in the sense that there's all this history and a record of people's lives. And then when a company moves in, another business moves into that office space, that history is effaced, it's erased, that record is gone forever. So I like that aspect of it. And it was very interesting and sort of creepy. Basically, I'd go to all the office buildings downtown, most of which were empty at this point, and I'd go from floor to floor to floor, just taking pictures and looking for things. And sometimes I'd go into an empty office and there'd be nothing there, and then you'd open a drawer and there'd be toothpaste and a toothbrush, or there'd be a child's drawing or something. Actually, for me, this is a very good example of the kind of photograph I like to take. I think it's really important. I have this kind of corny sentence that I say sometimes, all the time, which is that I think that photographs should be like unfinished sentences. And this is a very good example of what I like about photography. I think it should be, I want the art that I create to have sort of an algorithmic or algebraic relationship with the viewer. And by that I mean that I provide one half of the equation, and then I want you to provide the other half of the equation. Because I think that art is much more interesting if there's interaction on the part of the viewer. If I give you everything, it's not so interesting, I think. So in this picture, I kind of like the idea that it's actually, for me, a portrait of a person. And in particular, it's a portrait of a person's state of mind and what they were thinking about and how they were feeling at that moment when they were chucking pencils up into the ceiling. I have a peculiar sense of humor. I like this because I'm sort of interested in the way in which this was obviously of great importance to some people at a very particular time, and then when I shot it, it was of no importance to anyone. And I don't know, I just find that concept interesting.
How'd you get access?
Well,
What was the question?
how do I get access to the buildings? Well, there's a few ways. One is that I would always go and see the super, and I'd say either I'd give them $50, which is always useful, or sometimes I'd say I was scouting for a very big ad job for a location, and I was just looking around, and they'd say, "Sure, go ahead, but walk around." They didn't care, and I'd walk around, and I did actually come across one of the building staff having sex with a hooker in one of the cubicle farms. I walked in this huge cube farm, and this guy just popped up in the middle of the thing with this woman and just looked very alarmed. This is one of my favorites because, sorry, to segue back to, I always end up in sex. This is, I like, the company that makes these posters is called Successories. And I just find this fantastic because I'm very interested, a lot of my work deals with the idea of delusion. How we delude ourselves in terms of ethics, politics, religion, whatever it happens to be. And this is a perfect example of that, because I'm just so fascinated with the idea that someone, a boss, would buy this thinking that it's going to inspire the people that work for him in some way. Maybe it's just me who finds that fascinating. So this ended up being a very large book, actually, embarrassingly large book. I love the idea of books. Jaime and I were talking about it earlier. There's something lovely because they're so definitive, they're definite, they're things that speak for you, and kind of, when you make them, they kind of get released into the world and they float around and they represent your ideas or your emotions or your thoughts or your feelings about something in a way that a show will never do. So I'm very keen on making books, and I've been lucky with that so far. So at the same time I was making Bankrupt, I was also working on this project. You remember how I said that I had no interest in portrait photography? Well, it's kind of true unless there's sort of an overarching umbrella idea that encompasses the people I'm taking pictures of. So the thing I find about portrait photography is that it's like looking at a map. When you look at a picture of a person, it doesn't really tell you what they're thinking or what they're feeling necessarily. It's sort of a topographical record of a person's features. So I was wondering if there was a way to take photographs of people that would reveal some emotional aspect of their personality. So I had them play an Xbox video game called Dead or Alive, which was a very violent game. And I took pictures of them while they were playing games. And I know most of these people pretty well, but I just saw these aspects of their personality that I'd never seen before. It's actually interesting because men and women play very differently. When men play video games, it's all in the face. They tend to make really crazy faces. In fact, my assistant, I keep meaning to put a picture of myself in here because my assistant shot me doing this and I look utterly insane. So men make the crazy faces, but women, it's a completely cardiovascular activity. So they're doing this they're just sort of, they're doing this kind of crazy bobbing and weaving thing that's kind of fantastic. That was my assistant. So I never shot, as I said, I never shot studio photography. I didn't really know anything about studio photography. I knew nothing about lights. And for some reason or another, I guess I ended up shooting conceptual photographs for magazines. And I had to learn, or actually I'd had to get fantastic assistants who taught me everything, or I just watched as they did everything. But I got very interested in the idea of constructing photographs from scratch, which I'd never really done before. So a lot of my work deals with sort of, I'm very interested in America and how it functions in socio-political sort of I guess the politics, the desires, and this project was basically what this project was I was trying to figure out a way to make tangible the intangible. So I wanted to try and find a way to articulate the hopes and fears and the dreams and the paranoias and the desires that I saw in American society. So what I did was I designed these suits and I had them made, and then I shot people wearing these suits. So this is all in camera. There's no Photoshop madness happening, which is quite sad because everyone just always assumes it is Photoshop. But if you come to my studio, everything is all piled up there, and it's kind of like a Jeffrey Dahmer sort of joint. So, I mean, there is a little bit of retouching to get rid of strings and stuff like that, but basically, these are all suits. And I tend not to explain what each one represents because I prefer that people had that sort of dialogue that I was talking about earlier. The McDonald's burqa.
So you mentioned are these for magazines or for a project on your own?
This was for myself. But one of the things that's very handy about magazines is that you can, shooting for magazines is actually a fantastic thing because it does a couple of things. First of all, it sort of opens windows to possibilities and to ideas that you might not have considered. But secondly, you can get magazines to pay for stuff that you want to do, which is very handy. So that baby suit, I think it was Fast Company had said to me, could you think of a photograph to illustrate the changing ethno-demographic culture in American society or something like that? And I said, yeah, it's going to be a guy wearing baby suits, babies. And that, for some reason, made sense to them. So they paid to have the suit made, which was fantastic. Magazines are a good way to have them pay for or produce ideas and things that you want to do. One's called How to Spread Democracy. So a lot of my ideas are very linked to each other. It's just the link is only apparent to me and probably to no one else. And often the way I get to ideas is very circuitous and kind of bizarre. So I told you how I'm very interested in the idea of delusion. I'm also, so this phone sex basically happened around, I think it was 2004, 2005. It was at the beginning of all the Bush-Cheney madness and the Iraq War, and I was very interested in this. I was watching with amazement and incredulity at the way in which we were all participating in a lie. We were agreeing that it was interesting because we were being lied to, and we were agreeing to be lied to. We were agreeing to participate in that delusion. And this is where the sort of the weird, I know this is going to seem strange, but this is how I ended up at phone sex, because I was reading The Village Voice. People always assume it's because I'm a dirty old man, which is semi-true. But I was reading The Village Voice, and in the back they have all those phone sex ads, and it occurred to me that phone sex was sort of a mirror in some ways for what was happening in the country. When you call a phone sex operator, they create an illusion, and you both agree to participate in that illusion. So what I did was I started finding phone sex operators, and then I'd go around, take their photographs, and I'd interview them about their experience as phone sex operators. And these are just little excerpts from the interviews. But it was an utterly fascinating experience, and it was so surprising in so many ways. For instance, one thing that I realized was that you've got to be really smart to be a phone sex operator, because when someone calls you up, you've got to create this world, a very credible world, within minutes, and then you've got to fill that credible world with believable characters, and you've got to listen to the thing that the person is asking for, and you've also got to listen for the thing that he's not asking for but would like to ask for. So you've got to be very quick and sophisticated about how you read people. this guy was fantastic. It came as a shock to me, but I guess it shouldn't in retrospect, that men also do phone sex. So I think his name was Cortland. His specialty was sound effects. So what he's doing here is he's banging the chair against the table to simulate like a vigorous session against the headboard banging against the wall. And he had all these other things that he demonstrated to me. They were his signature dishes. One of the things that he used to do was he used to eat a peach to simulate oral sex, but apparently the giant family favorite that all the ladies would ask for was the sound of him slapping his penis against the phone. That was a real crowd pleaser. But the thing was, he couldn't be bothered to take it out all the time. So he said what he used to do is he used to do this with 2 fingers. And then he said to me, after a while, I realized that it didn't make me sound very substantial. So he said, I used to do this with my whole hand. So it sounded like I had this huge truncheon. And apparently this was very popular with his clientele.
Was it difficult to get their permission?
Not at all. I mean, I put ads on Craigslist, and then what I would do is when I do projects, these kinds of projects, I'm always very straightforward about what I'm doing and why I'm doing it. And then everyone who did phone sex always knew someone else who was doing phone sex. It's kind of, it just, yeah, exactly, exactly. One of the things I found interesting was that, the other thing was that every kind of person did it. This young woman was at, I think, NYU or Columbia. I mean, there were women in the Bronx, Brooklyn, New York. I mean, every kind of person did it on every kind of socioeconomic scale level. Oh, this woman was fascinating. So most of the people I shot were in New York, but this woman, she was in, I think, New Hampshire. So we were emailing back and forth, and she said, all right, fine. Why don't you meet me in the parking lot of a Barnes & Noble somewhere in New Hampshire at 12 o'clock? So I said, okay, because I guess obviously she wanted to see if I was a nutter or not. So I go to the parking lot with my assistant. She's there in the car with her boyfriend. We talk for a bit. She decides I'm not that crazy. So we go back to her place, and I'm looking around, because I try to shoot them, where they might do it, and generally what they might be wearing. But so I'm looking around, and I think, oh, this sofa looks good, because I like these pictures of all your kids, and it's kind of interesting. And then the boyfriend says, oh, no, we can't shoot on a sofa, because, she's going to be naked. And I said, what do you mean? And she said, oh, yeah, she's going to be naked, right? And I said, no, I don't want her to be naked. And then there was this incredibly awkward conversation for 10 minutes with me saying, I want her to wear clothes, and him saying, no, she should be naked. I mean, normally it's sort of the other way around with photographers. So we ended with, he would show me pictures of her naked, and then I could take the pictures of her with clothes on. So it was this horrifying experience, because basically I got all Hugh Grant and stuttery about it, because he showed me it was her naked on a beach, and I was talking about like the texture of the sand against her skin. I was just sort of gibbering like a madman. Anyway. But the other thing that was interesting about the phone sex world is that everyone seemed to really enjoy doing it, or they felt that it was really beneficial, either to themselves, that they were learning about themselves sexually, or that they were benefiting other people. They were giving something back to people. So they were remarkably positive about it. This woman was fascinating because she had started when she was a virgin when she started. So she told me she had to watch all these porn films with her friends, and then they would sort of point at scenes and go, yeah, that bit, remember that bit, so you can talk about it. She was fantastic. She was in Queens, and I went to see her at 9 a.m., and she was dressed like this. And she was making her family breakfast. Her son was a double major at NYU. It was this kind of Norman Rockwell scene. And she was dressed like that because I guess she also did webcam stuff too. She actually worked at an ad agency that I worked at, but I guess not at the same time. So that ended up being a book in 2005, I think. So, you know how I was talking about how ideas don't have to be photography. So this is really the first thing that I did that was installation art. basically, I was so enraged. It was sort of towards the end of the first Bush round. I was so enraged about the Iraq War that I felt like I wanted to say something. So I had this idea that if American foreign policy had a gift shop, what would it sell? And then what I did was I made stuff. And then, so these are photographs, but in the actual exhibition, they are things, they're physical things that you look at. So I made stuff, and I made things that were very connected to imagery from the Iraq War. So I don't know if you guys remember this picture from, I think it was Abu Ghraib. So I made the Abu Ghraib bobblehead doll. And then when it's shown, it's all shown in a fake gift shop. These are photographs from Guantanamo Bay. And I found actually somewhere online there were the dimensions and all these photographs. So I drew up blueprints, and I had it made into a full-scale replica as a bouncy castle of a Guantanamo Bay prison cell. The idea really is to take all these kind of contemporary, sort of cheesy things that you're familiar with that people sell in gift shops, and then sandwich that with the sort of the horrible political reality of the things that we were living through. I don't know if you guys remember Private Lydia England, who became very famous. It actually became an internet meme. She had all these pictures of her pointing at these poor Iraqi prisoners. So I turned it into one of those fairground cutout things, and then you could have your picture taken at the show. And you see, the thing is this, that it is shocking and it is in bad taste, but that's kind of the idea. I mean, I think you need to be shocking about that kind of stuff. This is one of my favorites. It's the Dick Cheney snow globe. He's shredding top secret documents, and then when you shake it around, all the shredded documents float around. That was very expensive to have made. These are postcards from secret prisons. This is I don't know if you remember the shock and awe doctrine. So this is the shock and awe chocolate bar. The chocolatey taste of freedom. And then when you unwrap it, it says mission accomplished. It was very hard to get this stuff made in the States. Although this I found a place that did like corporate promotional items. They made this for me. And every time I'd have a conversation with them, I'd always think to myself, do you know what I'm doing? And that is the Guantanamo Bay, Abu Ghraib coffee table. So my life took a very radical turn in 2006 when my mum died very suddenly. And I found myself taking care of my dad, who had dementia. Now, I didn't know he had dementia until my mum died. So it was all very shocking to me. And for the first year, I didn't really take any pictures because I was just sort of dealing with the idea of managing someone's life and the idea of my mum being gone and all sorts of things. And the thing about my father's dementia was he had no short-term memory. So basically, for the first 2 or 3 or 4 months, he would say to me, every hour, every half hour, I'd say, "Where's your mother?" And I would say, "She died. We went to hospital. I took you to the funeral. Do you not remember this?" And he'd be so shocked and so appalled. And it was like every time he learned this, it was the first time he was hearing this. And it was an incredibly miserable and painful experience for me and for him. So I decided to create a reality that we could both inhabit. You know how I talk about delusion? Well, I decided to create an illusion for both of us to live in. And that illusion was the idea that my mother was alive and living in Paris taking care of her brother. So this was the story that I told my dad for the remaining years he lived. And I started taking pictures of him, and I started writing about our life together. And it was a really, I didn't take very many photographs because I didn't want the process of taking photographs to overwhelm the process of being with my dad and just hanging out and loving each other. So I didn't take that many pictures, but I took pictures and I wrote about it, and I put it up on the web, and I didn't think that anyone would be very interested in it because it was so extraordinarily personal. But this really magical thing started happening, and I started getting emails from people, and a dozen a day, and then 100 a week, and then 1,000 a week, and I ended up, I got so many emails from so many people, and a lot of them were from kids actually, which was kind of amazing. And it was a real honor and a real privilege to have that connection with all these people. And I just tried to record our lives together. One of the things about my dad was that I think he participated in this lie. I always felt that secretly, deep down, he knew the story with my mother. And he would write these notes and leave them lying around the house. He'd write them very late at night, and I'd find them sometimes during the day. This one says, "Where is Hélène," which is my mum? "Where is Philip?" "Where is Ralph," which is his brother? And then, "Where is everybody?" But he would never say that stuff to me. He would always try and maintain a cheery facade, or semi-cheery. The thing about this project is it's not about death, and it's not about dying, and it's not about old age. It's a love letter from me to my dad. And it's just about the time we had together, and some of it's beautiful, and some of it's painful, and some of it is odd. But, you know, isn't most of life like that, really? This picture is very important. You'll see later on, but my father was an actor, and that's him on the right with the moustache, the non-Asian chap. Although the guy on the right, on the left, is a non-Asian chap too, as it turns out. This is a Charlie Chan movie, and my dad hadn't seen it since it was made. And I found a DVD of it, and I got it on Amazon, and we watched it together, and it was kind of an amazing thing. You never think of your parents as anything. They're always this peculiar species called parents. They're never actually people. And it was amazing and so shocking to me to see my dad as a person, and in particular as a young man who was still strong and vibrant and had a clear voice and could move in a fluid, beautiful manner. Because my dad was born, when I was born, my father was 58. So even he never seemed like an old man to me, but I never knew him as a younger man, certainly not this age. And it was really extraordinary to watch him like this. He really remembered making the movie. In fact, he couldn't grow a moustache, so they had to glue one on, and apparently they called it the worm. And the worm used to fall off regularly, to much the amusement of everyone on set. But it's funny to watch him, because you know how people speak in the 30s in movies? They've got that weird, like, mid-Atlantic accent, this sort of semi-English, semi-American. That's how he sounds. It's kind of incredible to hear him talk like that. My dad was a handsome man when he was younger, and he was kind of unaware of how old he was in a peculiar sort of way. And in this picture, I asked him to look in the mirror. We were in the bathroom. I said, "Look in the mirror." And he looked in the mirror, and he was so horrified by how old he was, how he looked. And then a second later, he just composed himself, and it was as though that had never happened. He was a big napper. So my father was very ambitious, and one of the things that remained for him was his ambition for me, because I was as his only child. And he was always interested in what I was doing, always wanted me to push myself further. And every time I'd come home, he'd say, "So what have you been doing? What's new?" And I always knew that if he was in a bad mood, if he was miserable, that any sort of tale of my success would immediately cheer him up. So sometimes I just make stuff up because I just wanted to make him happy. But in this instance, I wanted to remember how his face looked. So I put the camera on the table, and I had just done a shoot for the New Yorker, which was one of the few magazines that my dad sort of remembered and connected to. And he said, "What have you been doing?" And I said, "Well, I just did a shoot for the New Yorker." And his face just exploded in this joy. It was really lovely. That's my dad in the bath. My father was an artist. I grew up with him painting and sculpting and drawing. He was always making things. That's one of the fondest memories I have as a kid, is you can't imagine how extraordinary it is when you're 10 or 11 to sit down with your dad and talk about ideas with him. He was always having ideas. And then a few weeks or a month or two later, to have him come and show me some work that based on maybe an idea I'd suggested. It was an incredible feeling as a little boy. And in this picture, he didn't paint anymore, but he still sort of in his mind thought he did. So in this picture, there was this beautiful light flooding into the apartment, and he was looking at it and talking about this series of paintings he was going to make with the light and the sun, and there were a lot of moments like that where it felt like it was kind of normal. Often my dad would look at me, and when he was looking at me, I would know that he knew what was going on. And in this picture, he was doing that, and then he just lowered his eyes and he sighed, and I took a photograph. So this turned into a book, shockingly enough. It was interesting. I couldn't get anyone to publish it, although it's turned out to be the most successful thing I've ever made. And because so many kids had emailed me and were interested in the book, I really wanted to make it a small and very cheap book. I didn't want it to be a big fancy photographer's book. So it's a book that cost $12 or $13 on Amazon. But also, I really wanted to involve all the people who'd written to me or sent me their emails in some way, in some small way, in the production of the book. So when I was going back and forth with the publisher about what should be on the cover, I said, why don't we ask all these people who've sent me their email addresses to vote on what should be a cover? And everyone voted, and this is what ended up on the cover. So at the same time as I was taking photographs of my dad, I was shooting for magazines and all the rest of it. And I went to shoot for the cover of a magazine, this gentleman. And when I saw him, I had this real revelation. And it seemed as though all these things I'd been thinking about suddenly crystallized and coalesced when I saw his face. Because he's a man who's had a lot of work done, a lot of reconstructive or plastic surgery. And it occurred to me, what is plastic surgery if not the denial of death and aging? It's the opposite of mortality. I mean, the thing I was living through with my father, I was waiting for him to die, so I was thinking about mortality all the time. I was thinking about death all the time. And this guy he was kind of going against the current, at least on a very surface level. And I became very interested in that idea. So I started taking photographs of people who'd sort of recreated themselves through plastic surgery. And as I progressed, I became very interested in some other ideas along with the first one. I was interested in the idea of beauty. And 20 years ago, if someone had said to me, I'm going to have my arm covered in tattoos or I'm going to get my tongue pierced, that would have seemed totally outlandish. And now it's completely mainstream. And I think in 20 or 30 years' time, the idea of what it means to look human may be very different from what it means now. I think that we are at a point in history when the technology is cheap and pervasive enough, and getting even cheaper and more pervasive, that we'll really be able to recreate ourselves in any way we see fit, and not necessarily in ways that reference traditional ideals of beauty. I mean, a lot of the younger people I shot had no interest in looking traditionally handsome. I mean, one of them, they want to look like animals, or they want to look like anime characters. I mean, they had their own particular definitions of beauty, which I found really interesting. I call it human-induced evolution, in the sense that we're sort of evolving ourselves, at least physically, and we're not relying on nature to do it for us. This is Justin. He's the chap who wanted to look like an anime character. So Steve has done pecs, biceps, triceps, quads, and then all the face stuff. And I got very interested. The reason it looks this way, I mean, it's not a particularly original way to shoot it, I guess, but I've always been a huge, I mean, I think my mum actually got me into this, but I've always been massively interested in Memling and Holbein, who were two Dutch painters, 15th and 16th century Dutch painters. Holbein in particular was a court painter. My mum told me a funny story about Holbein. Basically, Henry VIII. He was the court painter to Henry VIII, the King of England. And Henry VIII was very interested in a woman called Anne of Cleves, who was allegedly this Dutch beauty. So he sends Holbein over to paint a portrait. This is like an early Match.com thing. He sends Holbein over to Holland to paint a portrait of Anne of Cleves and come back and, he's going to check out the picture and then invite her over and get married. So Holbein goes over, makes the painting, does the painting, comes back, and Henry VIII looks and goes, yeah, she's foxy. I'll have her. And then, so the marriage is all arranged. Anne of Cleves shows up, and she's kind of nothing really like the painting. She's actually very unattractive. But it's kind of a tricky position. Sorry, I'm going off on a wild tangent. Anyway, the point I'm trying to make about Holbein is that he was representing a very particular beauty of his time in a very particular way. And I thought it'd be interesting to take that technique and represent a particular beauty of our time. So that's why these photographs look the way they do. So it's all straightforward portrait photography. The only thing I've done is I've sort of taken a little bit of color. And that, yes, shockingly ended as a book. Yes?
Have these people seen their pictures? Did you send them?
They have.
And did they like them?
They love them. Well, actually, it's interesting because whenever I take pictures of people, of course I offer them, I say, look, if you like a print, you're more than welcome to one. And then most of the time everyone said, no thanks, which is a real downer for me. Because what I realized was a lot of the people I was shooting were very used to seeing themselves portrayed in a very glamorous fashion. And for me, these are beautiful, dignified portraits, but they're not sexy or glamorous. I mean, they were used to seeing themselves looking, with a lot of makeup, with a lot of fake eyelashes, looking sort of pouty, all that kind of stuff. And I didn't want that kind of picture. So they were unused to seeing themselves portrayed like that. But I will say that since the project's been around for a year or two, I've had quite a few people call me up and say, actually, we would like a print, which is kind of gratifying. Because it's worth a lot of money now. So, Kim Jong-il, yes. Do you know who Kim Jong-il is, the former dictator of North Korea? So I said earlier that a lot of my work is now very personal. It's very reflective of what I'm thinking or how I'm feeling about things. So this is a body of work about what I require to function as an artist. And I think a lot about what I need to do to work as an artist. And it occurred to me I need two things. I need to be completely delusional, and I need to be utterly narcissistic. Because I need to think that I am making fantastic new ideas that no one else has seen before. And not only am I making thinking of these extraordinary ideas, but the world cannot wait to hear what I have to say. And then it occurred to me, which is of course total bullshit, but you need to believe in this illusion. And then it occurred to me that's very much like being a dictator. When you're a dictator, you create this fantasy world, and you fill that world with people who believe in you. So I was always been interested in Kim Jong-il. So what I did was this. I found photographs that people had taken on Flickr in North Korea of dictatorial art, of propaganda. And then I sent those photographs to China and had them recreate those murals of North Korean propaganda as paintings. So here's an example. But then they replaced the dictator with me. So these are all 30 by 40 oil paintings. So there's the original in North Korea somewhere. And then there's me enlightening the populace. So, yeah. It's very little to say. I mean, I know it's kind of a barking mad idea, but it was entertaining to me. This is Kim Il-suk's wife. I can't remember her name, but I love the painting. I love the image. So, plus I look fantastic in a skirt. So I'm saving the baby. This is such a great. I mean, the thing about North Korea is it's so much the narrative in the propaganda art is so peculiar and so weird. So I mean, just this idea that there's a line of soldiers waiting to be hugged by the dictator is just so creepy and fantastic. This is Kim Jong-il's book, which I thought would be funny, so I turned it into it. This is a 5-foot painting. I look a lot better in the painting than I do in real life, sadly.
Sell them?
Well, the thing yeah, I've sold some of them. I mean, the thing I like about the paintings is I made them in editions of 3. Because you're not supposed to do, painting isn't supposed to function that way, but because it's kind of a mass-produced painting, you know, you can do that. And plus, each one looks kind of different from the last. I mean, if you look at the way I'm portrayed, usually the Asians in the painting are portrayed quite accurately, but then I look sort of weird. Like in some of them, I look like I might have Down syndrome or something. No offense. I like this one, the warning shot.
Now, did the artists in China, did they have any idea, or did they think that you were like a new dictator?
I don't think so. It was funny actually because I had this really interesting relationship with Steve in China. And I said to Steve, I said, do you think, this was early on, I said, do you think you could send me a photograph of the painting in progress? Because I would make comments, I'd like to see how it's going, so if I make some comments. And so Steve sent me a picture of the guy painting the painting and like looking over his shoulder, smiling. And I said, no, Steve, I need to see the actual painting. I'm sure there's a guy actually painting it. I don't. So that's me with all the children. I'm very popular with kids. So then I also did bronze sculpture. So this is Kim Il-sung. So then there's me. Well, they all, what's interesting when you start looking at dictatorial art is all the same. They're always doing this or that, depending how lazy they are, I guess. That's Saddam Hussein. So there's me. I really like this sculpture because I have in my mind, I've created this, this fantasy that Saddam walks in and goes, yeah, you know, I like the idea of me being on horseback, but can't we just give a little bit of extra something? Like, what about some missiles on the horse or something? There's me as Laurent Kabila, the dictator of the Congo. He's fat and bald, so I am fat and bald, which will happen very shortly. So that's Kim Jong-il. I'm going to show you a very brief snifter of the thing I'm working on now. Remember I showed you this picture here? When I saw this photograph, what struck me when I watched this movie of my father was that everything I knew about my dad had not happened to him when this movie was taken. His entire life was this giant sort of sea of unknown in front of him. And he had no idea what was going to happen, which possible way his life might go. And I became really fascinated with the idea of thinking about all the possible ways my life might go. So I decided I'm going to do a project that envisions all the possible ways my life might be in the next 40 or 50 years. So that involves a lot of things. First of all, photography is always about the past. The moment you take a picture, it's the past. So how do you research a project that's about the future? So I did a DNA test, which told me all these illnesses and likelihood of what I'm likely to get, and et cetera, et cetera. And then I spoke to a lot of fortune tellers. And then based on all this information, I then worked with a prosthetics person who would then make me up as that version of myself. And then I'd take a picture. So this is me in my late 90s in Central Park. And then I would hire people, like I hired this nurse to wheel me around. I'm not even taking the pictures anymore. Basically, my assistants are taking the pictures. We went to the Met, the Metropolitan Museum. I got the senior discount, which was kind of fantastic. And then there's a video component to this project too. There's one of me when I'm very fat. So this is all I'm showing with this project at the moment, but basically it involves 4 or 5 hours of makeup, and then I've had to take acting lessons and all this stuff to try, because it's, when you're sitting as a man of 60, it's very different from the way you sit as a man of 44. So it's a very, very involving and massively expensive project, but I'm hoping to try and, it'll be interesting to see in 10 or 15 years which one is closest. And that's it. Thank you very much.
Are you open to taking some questions?
No, certainly not. Please ask questions so I'm not
And I'm
standing
gonna run
around.
with the mic. Wait,
Yes, sir.
I'm going to run around this for the video. Okay. Thank you.
I was just wondering. Is this on?
Yes, it's on.
All right. If you could talk about your career in commercial art.
The more
or-
interesting stuff.
No, like if the part that you hated and how you came to hate it and why you left it to be like to
You mean
focus
in
more
advertising
exclusively
or,
in advertising? Yeah.
Are you thinking about getting into advertising?
I don't know. I feel like it's something that not a lot of people are fortunate enough to have a lot of success in, and then you're like, oh, well, fuck this. I hate this.
This
you
is
know,
bullshit.
throwing this
Well,
out the
look,
window.
it wasn't so much. I have this peculiar way of rationalizing or of thinking about things when I'm trying to make decisions. I think about myself in the future, looking back in the past. So I remember thinking about when I was in advertising, imagining myself as a guy in his late 40s, like wearing a denim shirt. For some reason, I had this idea that I was wearing a denim shirt and like a Looney Tunes tie, and I had the Porsche and the whole thing and the house in the Hamptons, and I was like relaunching the Today Sponge or something, you know, always with wings or something. I was working on something, some product, and I thought about how I would feel about my life at that point, and I didn't feel particularly good about it, and so. Also, I have to say, the thing about me in advertising was that as I did keep getting fired a lot, which was some sort of indication, but also I didn't feel that I had a good career. I mean, I worked at good places, but I wasn't really great at it. And I felt as though I really wanted to try something that I felt like I could be great at. And I'm not saying I'm great as an artist or as a photographer, but I feel like I'm better at this than I was at advertising.
Were you shooting in advertising?
No. I mean, I was, you know, art director and writer. So, I wasn't shooting any campaigns or anything. I mean, I didn't go to art school, so it's a fantastic way to learn about everything, because you get paid exorbitant amounts of money for doing not that much work really, and you stay at posh hotels and have fantastic lunches and expenses all to the client, and you get to see interesting things. So that's how I saw stuff. So it's a very good thing to do, but. It wasn't a good long-term thing for me. But if you want to do it, you can make. I mean, it's a fun thing to do for a while. If you don't get fired. Yes.
Did you get any reaction from the government with the gift shop series at all?
No, I was really hoping I would. I was really surprised that I didn't. I was kind of paranoid that I'd be audited immediately on my taxes or something, surprisingly. But no, I didn't get any reaction. I mean, I have to say, one of my great fantasies is to. I always wanted it showed primarily in New York. I mean, it's shown actually it showed in Europe and Singapore. But I really wanted to show it in like a mall in the Midwest, in some empty storefront. Because that would have been fantastic, because people would walk in and they'd see all these bobbleheads and what's this all about, and then they'd realize what it's all about. I mean, the point of that work was to really enrage people. And I don't think there's much enraging to be done in New York, because everyone sort of, you know, more or less feels the same way for the most part. Maybe not.
Question back here?
Yeah, why do you identify yourself as a dictator?
Well, because I do think that making art is a dictatorial process, but it's not so much the idea of being it's what a dictator does in the sense of creating a fantasy world, a world that subscribes to various illusions or delusions, and then people believe in those, people subscribe to those. And I think being an artist is very much like that. You create a world, and then people believe in that world that you've created, or not. And the more people believe in it, then the more people believe in it. Do you know what I mean? Like, I've always been interested in this idea. I know Steve Jobs used to call it the reality distortion field, and I used to see it in advertising all the time. There were people who weren't particularly good at advertising, but somehow it seemed like they were. And then their ideas, which were mediocre, were believed in more because they seemed like they were generating this field. Does that make sense, or not really? No. Anyone else? Yes. Oh.
This will be my last question ever.
Ever.
For you. Do you ever look back at any of the photos you've published in books and just you hate them?
Oh,
like
yeah.
you hate looking at them?
A lot.
Okay.
A lot of the, I mean, you should talk to my assistants. It's a 50-50 chance that on an editorial shoot I will just descend into sort of a miserable Stygian gloom and just say, this is shit, what I'm doing. Because I often feel, more often with the commercial stuff, I feel that it feels compromised somehow, and I think it's terrible. Second last ever last question.
I meant more with your personal work.
Oh, the personal work's all incredible. Yeah, it's amazing. Well, no, I mean, I don't know. I mean, I guess that in some ways the thing with my dad is probably the best thing I'll ever do. And there's something sad and beautiful about that. I don't know, maybe it's too soon to say, because I've made most of this work in the last 7 or 8 years. I mean, I'm very productive in some ways. So it's hard to see. I think I'm sure I'll look back on stuff. Actually, it's interesting, I look back on pictures I took when I was, all that black and white stuff, and stuff I took when I was in my 20s, and I think some of that's just terrible. And I'm just amazed that I even got to where I am, not saying I'm anywhere particular, but.
So do you consider yourself more of like an art director sort of thing now, or like a photographer? Because it seems like you guys go do this, I'm gonna act now. Like I feel like you're like a chameleon to all of these different roles. Like how do you?
I consider myself a conceptual artist. I know that sounds massively pompous, but everything for me is an idea. So, I mean, yes, I'm not making a lot of that stuff, but neither did Warhol.
Yeah. But then how do you, like, with working with a big group of people? Do you ever have trouble with someone's like feels like they have the right to something, or like
the bankrupt people?
No, just like a group of people, like the painters in China, and then everything else. Like, how do you arrange all of that so no one like tries killing, suing, thing?
Well, I didn't think about the assassination possibilities.
It happens.
Actually, when I had the show of Kim Jong-Phil in Singapore, I really wanted to hire like 5 lookalikes. Because you know how dictators have lookalikes in case they get assassinated? I want to have 5 dictators lookalikes to sort of talk about my work. I don't know. I haven't thought about that. Perhaps that's unethical. I mean, I guess that I mean, there's a long history in fine art of artists subcontracting out. I mean, right down to the Renaissance, Da Vinci, etc., Leonardo. What's his name? Jeff Koons, all those people. So I think that as long as I'm not, well, I mean, with the propaganda stuff, I guess I am really stealing someone's painting in a way. But with all the other stuff, I'm having people who make stuff for me that's very particular to my idea. But I will keep an eye out for assassins. Thank you for that. Anyone else? Someone in the...
Right back.
Yes.
Hi. Can you talk more about your commercial work? Like when you shoot for magazines, what kind of team do you assemble? What do you like to shoot? And just a little bit more about that part of your career.
The way it works for magazines is they will... because I've been now branded as this ideas person, which is sort of irritating in a way. Because sometimes you just want to take a bloody picture. You don't want to think of an idea. But the way it always works is that they will send me the article. They'll call me up and say, okay, we've got a story about such and such. They'll send me the article. I'll read the story. And then I'll call them up and I'll say, okay, here's what I think should happen. So it's actually very much like being an art director in advertising. And I mean, I'm doing the same thing with my art. It's all a question of ideas. It's just how those ideas are manifesting themselves. And yeah, there are a bunch of people I work with, prop people who I work with for a long time. I mean, this fantastic woman who made those Hope and Fear costumes, for instance. But yeah, there's a group of people I tend to work with. But it's almost always in studio, set stuff. Although I'm going actually I'm going tomorrow to Arizona to shoot in a retirement home for the New Yorker. I mean, magazines like to, they like to look at things you've done and then kind of have you do something that's vaguely similar. Although the conceptual stuff is interesting because you get a chance to really try new things. But the problem with conceptual photography for magazines, it's always a very binary proposition. It's either really interesting or total shit. And there's not much middle ground for that. So it's always a bit nerve-wracking. Was that satisfying? Not really. You're welcome. I think you had one in the front. Oh, you did, sorry.
Okay, Marco, wait. Back to front.
Run, Forrest.
When you're tackling these huge issues, how do you go about boiling it down to a visual series of photographs or artwork?
Well, that's interesting. I guess it's just sort of it's kind of just how I think. It's sort of a process of whittling. You know what I mean? You just you just keep removing extraneous information, extraneous stuff until you just arrive at the simplest possible articulation of the thing you're trying to say. If that makes any sense at all. I mean, I generally, often the ideas I'm thinking of acquire sort of more ideas, like barnacle ideas, as I'm going through. Like the New Kind of Beauty, I became interested in other aspects of that as I was working through that project. But really, it's a process of removal. And I shoot like that too. I mean, I really like pictures that have very little in them in a way. Like, you know, like Alex Webb, do you know his work? They're very layered images. My images are not that sophisticated, I think. They're kind of straightforward. I mean, I just want it to be as simple as possible. Like I often read artist statements and they're totally incomprehensible. I have no idea what they're talking about. And for me, I mean, they're these kind of club sandwiches of references about, like, you know, Heidegger and whatever, people I've never heard of. And they're not even, they're talking to curators and museum people, but for me, I really want it to be a paragraph or two of something very clear and very, and I write it. So I write it and then I rewrite and rewrite and rewrite until it becomes very clear for me.
I was wondering if you have some advisors from the art world that help you.
I wish I did.
So you are doing everything on your own. You edit. You
pretty
don't-
much. I mean,
You don't trust everyone.
No. I'm quite happy to talk about my work to anyone who'll listen, but
You didn't find anyone.
no, I mean, yeah, exactly. Everyone runs when they see me. I'm going through a tunnel. So, if that makes sense. So, I mean, no, I mean, I wish it would be. I was actually talking about this with Jaime. That I wish there was a group of people I could sit down with and sort of talk about. I mean, there's a couple of projects I'm working on now. There's this one, and there's two others that I would love to talk about with people, because I know there's interesting things in them, and I'm trying to figure out what that thing is, and it's very frustrating because I'm trying to whittle, and I'm not quite finding it.
Because, for example, in this program, we were taught that it's really important to edit your photos for the website, so it's good to seek for the help, like to.
I'm a huge believer in talking about stuff. I really think that's very important. I mean, a lot of people I know don't like to show work till it's all ready, but I'm quite happy to show stuff when it's completely half-assed, because I have no qualms in you know, reconceptualizing or reorienting myself. I don't mind doing that. I mean, it's just going to make the idea stronger. I mean, you don't have to take everyone's advice, but more often than not, it's in talking about it to someone else that I understand the thing I'm trying to say myself.
Mm-hmm. Have you ever
No.
gone to the portfolio reviews?
Yeah, I did a bunch of reviews. I went to I did the whole bloody, you know, orgy. What it was, Houston Photo Fest, all that stuff. But I always went with, but when I was going there, I always went with work that was ready to go. I wasn't really interested in people's advice. I know that sounds arrogant, but, you know, I just, okay, here's the stuff. Do you want to give me a one-man show who goes in or not? I actually had a fantastically enjoyable, I had a review once with a woman from Aperture magazine. She said, so as I was sitting down, she said, so what do you expect? She was very stern. She said, what are you going to get out of this? What do you think you're going to get out of this? I said, well, you're going to look at this work and you're going to find it amazing and you're going to publish it in the magazine. And she looked at me and said, that's not going to happen. And then I showed her the work and she published it in the magazine. It was fantastic. Anyone else?
Is that a good note to end on?
Thank you very much. Thank you.